I have been dreading making this review for over a year now. In case you're out of the loop, I made a video reviewing the first Devil May Cry game last year. Now, despite that video doing pretty poorly for my standards, I'm still proud of it and want to continue making reviews for the rest of the series. This, of course, means that I would have eventually had to have come back to Devil May Cry 2. If you are somehow unfamiliar with Devil May Cry, it is a character action game series created by Capcom in the early 2000s. Now, the first game was, it was kind of good. Despite some of its jank, it had a lot going for it, and Capcom knew it. To provide some background, Devil May Cry had just been released in stores. Division 4, aka the team that worked on the game, would soon find out that a sequel was being developed, but not by them. They weren't even told directly. Hideki Kamiya only found out when someone from the other division asked him for documents. Of course, since a grand majority of the developers were not from the original team, there were some complications. You probably know the rest, but the game was a complete mess. The original director of the game would soon step down, and Hideaki Itsuno would take the role instead. He and the rest of the team somehow made the game playable within just 6 months. The game would ship in January 2003 to mostly mixed reception. Many fans of the first game were baffled by the quality of the game, and many called it one of the most disappointing games of 2003. So what's the big deal? Could it just be another case of gaming journalists and critics overreacting? Well... Okay, now I know that's not really enough proof, so I decided to not only play Dante's campaign, but Lucia's as well. Prepare yourself, we're getting into some deep shit here. The game begins with a monologue explaining the story behind Sparta, similarly to DMC1. This is where you first meet the game's second protagonist, Lucia. Although the monologue is a bit different, as at the end it brings up that Dante inherited Sparta's power.
And now, the legend of Sparta has been inherited by his son, the Demon Slayer, Dante.
It's then we actually see the man himself. I wonder what witty things he has to say.
You called?
Oh, okay, maybe later on in the mission?
Looks like it's your lucky day.
Okay, surely he says something funny later on in the game.
Forget about me. Kill Arius.
Don't worry. I've got you.
Alright, what the fuck? Yeah, if you enjoyed Dante's cockiness in the first game, you're not going to find it here. For whatever reason, someone at Capcom thought that Dante being a little silly wasn't cool enough, so they made him more serious and broody. While they did sort of give an explanation years later, it's still kinda stupid. The characters in general feel lifeless and lack any sort of personality. Dante especially. It's like if a TikTok Resident Evil fan saw like 2 seconds of DMC1 and just assumed Dante was an edgy badass. Arias might just be the most forgettable villain in any Capcom game. He just exists, I guess. The story is pretty much non-existent. The whole story could be summed up to Dante meets an old lady and her daughter and fights the bad guy. The end. At least DMC1 actually had stuff going for it and had a narrative that was somewhat interesting. Other than the intro, there's a little story to be found unless you look really hard. What also sucks is that if you play as Dante first, like most people would, you miss out on the actual good bits of lore the game has. All of it is mostly tied to Lucia's campaign, which a lot of people didn't play because they hated Dante's story. Funny enough, if you play the game on your PS2 right now, it's 2 separate discs. Promise me, DMC2 isn't so big that they had to put it on 2 discs. They just did to oversell it. The HD collection sort of remedies this by just letting you choose who to play as before booting up the game. Getting back on track, you might think, oh, the story is pretty bad, but the gameplay's gotta be good, right? 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 I've played some pretty bad games. I've been playing video games for almost 16 years now. However, I have never played a game as bad as Devil May Cry 2. I kid you not, it took me months just to finish the game on my first playthrough, and then a couple more weeks just to finish it for this video. With all the other DMC games, I've replayed them more times than I can count. I've actually been replaying all the games again ever since I got my Steam Deck. I'll make a video on it eventually. However, I've only beaten DMC2 twice. As I mentioned, I played it once on my own, and then the second time for this video. The combat is just terrible. It looks bad in motion, and it feels even worse when you actually play it. In DMC2, every weapon feels the exact same, including Lucia's. There's also less variety when it comes to the weapons. In DMC1, you had a standard sword, a sword that gave you lightning powers, gauntlets and boots that gave you fire damage, and a sword that dealt a shit ton of damage. Every sword in DMC2, however, has the exact same moveset and animations. They just vary in damage. I think. I don't know. I didn't pay attention. Upgrades have been simplified as well. Instead of buying specific skills for each weapon, all you do is just spend red orbs to increase the weapon's damage. Oh, are you perhaps one of those people who hated the guns in DMC1 for being too weak? Well, this game's got you covered. Melee combat has not only been severely neutered, but guns do significantly more damage than before, making them your go-to weapon instead of the weapons you actually care about. Even if you try to swear off guns, the game basically forces you to use them, flying enemies that are a pain in the ass, bosses that can be cheesed by just shooting them, and bosses just straight up cannot be fought with weapons. The Infested Chopper is a popular yet great example. I showed it to you at the beginning of the video. Enemies and bosses in general feel weaker in this game. Half of them didn't even get the chance to attack me as I just shot them or mashed triangle a bunch. If you watched my DMC1 review, you may remember that I mentioned that the camera wasn't my favorite part of the game, and I still think it could have been done better. However, the camera in DMC2 is even worse. Most of the time, the camera doesn't even follow your character correctly, especially during combat. Speaking of bad mechanics, DMC2 also tried to implement a proper lock-on system. It's just not good at all. It's very inconsistent as it doesn't really know what enemy it wants to target. You can change which enemy it locks onto, but even then it's still very annoying to deal with. Also, in some areas, the lock-on is so annoying that it becomes a challenge to hit switches. I didn't even think that was possible when I first played, but look at my footage. It's... wow. This sucks. Oh, and I shit you not, as I was writing this script, I discovered that you can turn off the lock-on system entirely. It's like they knew it was bad. Another part of the game that was downgraded from the first was the level design. See, most of the developers working on this game have previously worked on arcade games, many never having worked in the home console space. And I don't fully blame the developers here, I'm sure they are talented people. That being said, Devil May Cry 2's level design is absolute dog shit. Areas are more open, but that just leads to enemies having a hard time trying to track you down. In my opinion, the layout of the levels discourages you from exploring. Most exploring you do is either getting lost or being confused since the game's levels get worse as you get into the later half of the game. Although, I will admit that the levels themselves do look pretty cool. The city area especially. Sadly, however, the city level itself is probably the worst part of Dante's story. I got lost constantly, and do not get me started on the puzzles. Ugh. Oh, and you thought the water levels in the first game were bad? Oh boy, you were not ready for the ones in Lucia's campaign. They somehow made them even worse. Thankfully Dante doesn't get any, but poor Lucia. Okay, so the game has a shitty story, god-awful gameplay, and less than mediocre level design. Surely there has to be something good about this game, right? Surprisingly, yes! I used to think that DMC1's soundtrack was underrated, but after having listened to the tracks in DMC2, it sounds pretty good. Does it hold the same candle as the first game? Well, no, but it's still pretty solid. I didn't mention her a lot, but I actually really like Lucia. I think her campaign is the best out of the two, even if the water levels are the absolute worst. I'm super disappointed that she never returned in any of the games. All we got was a small appearance in the DMC5 prequel novel Before the Nightmare. As I mentioned earlier, I actually like how the game looks visually. I dig the vibes they were going with, and we can all agree that Dante's outfit goes hard as fuck in this game, right? Also, if you somehow manage to beat the game on hard mode, or use cheats like I did, you unlock Trish as a playable character. She basically has the same moveset as Dante from the first game, so that's pretty cool, although it still doesn't make the game much better. This game also introduced the concept of the weapon swap system. In DMC1 you could switch between your sword and Ifrit at will, but it played an animation that gives you little to no invincibility frames. Plus, you still had to manually switch guns. DMC2 doesn't let you swap weapons on the fly at will, but you can swap between any gun you want. Don't see why you would though, as Ebony and Ivory pretty much outclass all the guns already. Still, this would later be better implemented in Devil May Cry 3. DMC2 also had the amulet system, which altered how your devil trigger behaved. It was actually kinda cool. One last thing is that, while I did say Dante is more stoic and serious, he does have one banger ass line near the end of the game.
My dream! My life! I was going to be the king of this world!
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
Usually I end off videos saying in conclusion or overall, but honestly I don't even know what else there is to say about this game. As much as I hate it, I do think it had good ideas. Trust me, there's worse. There's rumors going around about a potential DMC1 remake, which is exciting, although I won't hold my breath until we officially see it. If it is real and it ends up being really good, I hope DMC2 gets the same treatment, as I would love to see the game be fully reimagined and get more polish. There is a mod for the game made by I Am Most Wanted called Devil May Cry 2 Definitive Edition that completely revamps stuff like the combat and the style system. If you want a more playable version of the game, I'll leave a link to a video that showcases the mod in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on notifications. You don't have to though, you can always change your mind later. If this video at the very least does as well as the DMC1 review, I'll continue to review the rest of the series, so if you want me to review DMC3, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.